Okay, so finding that seat, and from that seat, really allowing the exhale breath to settle you. And thinking about how we can stack the spinal column itself. So the seat becomes an opportunity for finding the structure. And then once you find the structural stack, we're going to try to take the thoracic spine and just draw it back slightly. So the goal here is to get the anterior musculature to activate. So thoracic spine is just barely coming back. And from that place, the front of the body has to work to stabilize us a little bit more than it traditionally would. And then once you get that little thoracic retraction, so structure and grounded seat, and then we shift and we're really trying to keep the lower half of the spine stable while we pull the upper half back slightly. That's how we really get this anterior musculature to activate. Once you get that, then we're going to try to relax the breath even more. And the challenge there is because we're working so hard on this anterior musculature, the breath can feel kind of grippy and almost tension inducing. So we're looking to relax that. If by relaxing your breath, you end up relaxing the musculature, then reset, restack, shift the thoracic spine back, and then try to relax the breath once again. So really want the anterior musculature to be active here. And let's give ourselves about another 60 seconds. It's been just a little bit less than that, but really trying to make the front body musculature work in a way that's pretty uncommon. And then as you feel right, we'll bring that thoracic spine back in line with the belly or lumbar, and let the chin come down to the sternum. Chin comes down the sternum, we get that upper thoracic posterior musculature. And it's pretty counter force to what we've just been doing. So this may feel like an awful lot. And then we'll lift our head and chin back to neutral. And let's transition to hands and knees tabletop. And as you come in hands and knees tabletop, splay your fingers out nice and wide. The fingers splay out nice and wide. I'll flip my mat over to the appropriate side. And we'll take the pinkies out to the width of the mat. Pinkies out to the width of the mat. Knees come in towards one another. Heels come in towards one another. Sink yourself back towards child's pose. And we're going to go through that same little setup that we did in seat. So the thoracic spine is pulling back while we're maintaining this lumbar neutrality. So it's a little bit, or it could be a little bit of a lift, actively lifting away from the mat. And then once you get that little thoracic retraction, squeeze the anterior hip crease towards the back of your mat so that we are very active across the front of the body. Now we're recreating the shape or creating the shape with some engagement in the hips. We'll give ourselves 10 more seconds here. And then as you are right, hand slide in front of us if they're not already there, and we'll inhale to tabletop. And from tabletop, just curl the toes, roll back into down dog. And we've actually created a lot of room in the torso. So anterior and posterior have a lot more room than you might expect. Remember that if the lower half of the posterior chain is still compacted, restricted, bend the knees, offer some more slack to the system and get that depth. And then let's walk forward to the front of the mat. And as we come into that forward space, take a nice big inhale, find your half lift. And then exhale all the way back into your fold. Settle into your fold, let your low back completely release. Really think about that capacity for release in the low back. And then let's shift our weight to our toe mounds. So the weight comes just a little bit forward. And then let the heels lift just slightly. And as the heels lift slightly, let your head fall a little bit deeper into the shape. Then drop your heels back and balance the weight between the heels and the toe mounts. And then use that to just roll yourself up. We should get this big flexion energy in the middle of the spine as we come up. And we'll inhale our hands together at heart center. Full fluid breath in this mountain pose. And then take your thumbs, best way to show this here, thumbs, and really press them into the sternum. So really finding that fascial tissue and that musculature that is attached to the sternum plate. And with the thumbs pressed into that, we're going to lift our chin. So we really want to catch this musculature like we're pulling the sternum musculature down as we lift the chin. It really helps to open up this anterior throat space. And then bring the chin back to neutral and sweep the arms up and overhead. And we'll go all the way through forward fold. And there's more space in your fold already, right? That anterior throat space actually helps bring slack into the system. Find that, plant your hands, walk back into down dog. And then you have all that extra room now available to you in down dog. Again, even if the legs are still restricted, find that space. And let's come back down to hands and knees tabletop. This time a traditional leg alignment as we slide back into child's pose. And feel the difference, child's pose 1 versus child's pose 2 here. Think about how you can relax into the end of that exhale breath so that you're sinking into the full depth of your shape. And use the idea of complete release on the exhale side of your breath, both physically and in that respiratory action as well. We'll give ourselves about 30 more seconds here. When you're right, when you're ready, pulling ourselves back to tabletop. From tabletop, curling the toes, lifting our way back into down dog, expressing the depth of that shape, pedal that out a little bit. Find that full depth, maybe even we sway the hips a little laterally. And then we're gonna walk ourselves forward and into fold. Inhale to half lift and let the hands slide up just above the knees. So you can press the hands into the thighs. And then drop the gaze so it's straight down and push the top of the head out towards the front of the room. Splay the toes out nice and wide. And then let's use either the pressure of the hands or the strength of the lumbar musculature to lift all the way up to mountain. Bring our hands together at heart center. Push the thumbs into the sternum once again. So really capture that fascial tissue and slide the left foot straight back into lunge. So we have this nice straight alignment, but we have the musculature tacked down and we're going to lift the chin. Try to get the chin to lift enough until you feel the throat really start to open up. And then release the head back to neutral and just relax the hands. And as the hands relax and the sternum musculature relaxes, find the additional space in your lunge so that we get all the way into that full depth. And then we'll sweep the arms up and fully express the shape. And then we're going to float the hands to heart center and use that energy to step to the front of the mat. Thumbs press into that sternum musculature once again. So we capture that tissue. Second side, slide straight back, right foot straight back. Find that strength and lift the chin. Capture that throat expansion. Bring the chin back to neutral, drop the hands. As the hands drop, as the sternum space comes in, take that extra space we now have in our crescent, and then fully express crescent. And then hands return to heart center as we step forward to the front of the mat. Sweep the arms up and overhead. Exhale through forward fold. Inhale to half lift. Exhale back to fold. Plant your hands, walk to plank. Get all the way into this plank space. Feel the strength in that plank and then lower yourself down to your belly. As you come onto your belly, keep the hands right where they are. Yeah, so relatively under the shoulders. And then you're gonna squeeze your elbows in towards the rib cage, like you're trying to pull your elbows inside of the shoulders. So what we're looking for here is to have the kind of a diamond amount or a diamond shape here. So shoulders to elbows, shoulders are wider, elbows are squeezing in, hands are pressing down, and then start to pull your elbows towards your sacrum. So they're squeezing in and pulling towards the sacrum. That's going to help us broaden out across the collarbone space and still squeeze into that diamond energy, triangle energy. There we go. One of those shapes for sure, though. And then relax and just slide your hands underneath your forehead, little crocodile pose. Hands stacked. Nice, easy respiration rate. And so there's this Indiana Jones style archaeologist. And he is this misunderstood, often in trouble, quote unquote scholar who spends an awful lot of time adventuring, exploring in a true Indiana Jones-esque style. And this particular week, he's had a lot of trouble with the university where he teaches and gets in a big dispute with the dean. And he feels like he's being unfairly judged because he's just so different than the rest of the intellectuals that he spends his time with, the society that he spends his time with. So he's pretty happy to be on a cargo plane headed to this remote location where he's going to search for this lost city known as Reflection. We're going to give ourselves 30 more seconds here. While he's on this plane, he's reading these ancient texts with this program that translates. And he's finding out all kinds of things about this city. It's kind of borders on the line, whether it's real or it's a myth. But there's a lot of ancient information about it. So he's starting to become more and more confident it's a real thing. Whether he can find it or not is something he'll find out. When you're ready, hands slide back underneath the shoulders. We'll press ourselves up to hands and knees tabletop. And from hands and knees tabletop, let's curl our toes, lift our seat, find our way back into down dog. Press down into that finger mound space, lift into that hip space. Really think about accentuating the distance on the front and back side of the body. So anterior, posterior expansion. And let's once again walk ourselves to the front of the mat. So we end up in a fold, front of the mat, head dropped, knees can bend if it feels appropriate for you. Drift your awareness to your sacrum. Let's roll ourselves up vertebrae by vertebrae. Coming all the way to mountain, letting the hands come together at heart center. Playing the toes out on the right foot and lifting our left knee up into half Karate Kid. And let's slide our left foot straight back and into lunge. Make sure that left heel lands in a way where it's pointed straight up. Sweep both arms up and into crescent. Think about getting a little bit deeper into your shape through that space that we created the last time we were here. And then drop your hands to heart center. Slow down the respiratory rate. The hips are working very hard. The quads are working very hard. Glutes can start to compensate. Then sweep the arms back up to crescent. Float the hands down to the mat. Now you have some fatigue in the hips. Slide back into that right hamstring, little pyramid space. The key here is because you have the fatigue in the hips, all the weight's going to want to dump out to the right. So the body wants to hide to the right. Hug that back behind you. Make the hamstring do the work. And the hamstring usually offloads the work to the hips because the hips are pretty accustomed to having a workload. Hamstrings not necessarily accustomed to having a workload. Really force the hamstrings to work here. And then rebend that front knee and step forward into what is a very fatigued forward fold. Let your head drop. Sweep the arms up and overhead. And exhale your hands to heart center. Mountain pose. Feel the asymmetry or potential asymmetry in the right and left side of the body here. And then splay your toes out on the left side. Right knee comes up into that half Karate Kid. And we'll slide the right foot straight back and into lunge. Find that strength in the leg structure. Think about the quads being active, really want that musculature working. Back leg as well. That knee is straight, then sweep the arms up. Express that shape. Find that extra depth we've created. Really think about how we can be strong and stable here as we get deeper and deeper. Slow down the breath. Remember, we're using this to really put some strain on the hips. And then when you feel right, when you feel ready, hands come down to the mat. We'll slide back into that left hamstring. Now everyone's going to want to duck out to that right side. So, or left side, excuse me. So hug that left tailbone back and behind you. Left tailbone. Hug the tailbone from the left behind you so that we're more linear. And make the hamstring do the work here. We really want the hamstring to be tasked with the stability. And then we'll eventually bend that left knee, step forward into an extra fatigued forward fold. Let your head go. Sweep the arms back up and overhead. And exhale your hands to heart center. Okay. So now we have fatigued hips, fatigued hamstrings, and we're gonna put some work into the quads. Thinking the seat back towards chair. Really think about hips back, not knees forward. So we're getting into that quad work. Torso comes down to the thighs. Plant your hands, walk to down dog. To tabletop. Flip the tops of the feet and sink into child's pose. And now this child's pose there's a lot of availability here. The availability is coming from that effort that we've asked of the hips, burnout of the quads, burnout of the hamstrings. There's not a lot of leg musculature that has the strength or capacity to fight against this shape. So really slow down your breathing and feel the weight of your torso settling. Like each breath is this invitation for more and more of your body weight to be offloaded onto the thighs, and if not onto the thighs, towards the mat. Let's give ourselves, we'll give ourselves about 45 more seconds here. So as this archaeologist is reading about this potentially mythical ancient city, he keeps hearing about this mirror. This mirror that seems to be granting wishes. And when you're right, when you're ready, let's slide forward into tabletop. From tabletop, curl your toes, lift your seat and find your way back into down dog. And from down dog, just settle into some length. The weird thing about this mirror and the wishes is it doesn't seem to be like most mythical things that can grant any wish you ask of it. It seems that if you make a wish on this mirror, it only grants one particular wish, no matter what is asked, and no matter who asks of it. When you're right, when you're ready, let's walk to the front of the mat. Inhale to half lift. Exhale to fold. And sweep yourself all the way up and overhead. And exhale those hands to heart center. Let the eyes close if it's comfortable for you. Thinking about that last sequence that we went through with the hip fatigue, the hamstring fatigue, the quad fatigue, really think about resettling in mountain. And then we're going to go back to the start of class where we found that vertical spine. And then with the vertical spine, we brought just the thoracic spine back slightly. So we want the thoracic spine here to roll back, shoulders to broaden out, and the anterior musculature to be involved, significantly involved in the keeping of us vertical. In a way where usually we rely on the posterior chain, we're asking of the anterior chain here. We'll give ourselves 15 more seconds. This is an amazing amount of ask for this mid-body musculature. And it's really nice to have this strength and this capacity on both the front and back side of the body. And then bring the thoracic spine back to neutral. And as the thoracic spine comes back to neutral, pay attention to how the posterior chain just takes over, how the anterior chain really deactivates. It's why it's so easy to end up in this shape when we really want this shape. So with this kind of neutrality in mind, hands come together, heart center. We'll slide the left foot once again straight back, lunge, and then we're going to ground and roll towards warrior 2-esque energy, and then blossom all the way into warrior 2. What's interesting, what can be interesting, not necessarily, but what can be interesting, because we've done so much lateral, posterior, anterior chain, but we've done none of this medial chain space, is warrior 2 might be a space where, oh, all of a sudden I'm aware of the medial restriction, which is something we don't often or always get feedback on. And then we're right back to full crescent. Arms sweep up, back heel spins up, sink all the way into the depth of the shape. Ground both hands. As the hands ground, find verticalness in that right tibia and fibia. So really try to get the shin nice and vertical. And then left hand plants, right hand's gonna roll into a twist. As you do that, watch what's happening with the left heel. Make sure it's not rolling out. We want that to stay nice and straight up, and we want that left quad flexed. Right hand comes down to the mat. We'll use that to pull the left foot forward and return to fold. Inhale to half lift. Exhale to fold. Sweep yourself up. Hands come together at heart center. Find that stability, anterior, posterior neutrality, right foot slides straight back. Crescent or crescent-esque, and then we ground and roll towards warrior 2 energy, and then all the way to warrior 2. Once again, as those, especially as those arms expand, feel how that medial line is asked for the space, and really try to allow the awareness to be on this lateral edge of the front quad so that we're pulling and rolling open into space. Right heel spins up, both hands reach up. Crescent. Strength of that back leg. Hands come down to the mat. Right hand plants, right quad flexed, left hand rolls to our twist. Left hand comes down to the mat. Right foot steps forward and return to fold. Inhale to half lift. Exhale back to fold. Plant your hands, walk into plank. Create that sensation of stability in plank. Squeeze the glutes and lower yourself down to your belly. So from our belly this time, let's take a little bit of a, think about if that's opposite, not exactly opposite, but we're gonna run the hands straight out in front of us. So forehead anchors to the mat, Fingertips, walk or push forward. Come up onto your fingertips. And then take your feet out to the width of the mat. Squeeze the biceps in towards the ears and keep the fingertips planted. So there's a lot of energy around the shoulders here. And then relax. Slide your hands underneath your forehead for a little crocodile pose. The feet can stay wide or they can come back into neutral, whatever feels most appropriate for you here. Really think about how you can be the most beneficial. And the biggest indicator here is going to be the lumbar. Let's see, the torso leg unionization, the lower and upper half of the body unionization, where you get that little integration. If you're feeling any dysfunction there, adjust the legs in. When we have the legs open, it allows for the pelvic bowl to be more forward. And when we bring those legs in, it closes up that pelvic space a little bit more, and it pulls the anterior of the pelvic bowl just a little bit away from the mat, a little bit more towards neutral. And we'll give ourselves just about 20 more seconds here. And then when you're right, when you're ready, let's pull our hands back underneath our shoulders. We'll press up to hands and knees tabletop. From hands and knees tabletop, curl the toes, lift the seat, find your way back and into down dog. And from down dog, let's once again walk to the front of the mat. We end up in a fold. Inhale to half lift. Exhale to fold. Sweep yourself up and overhead. Exhale the hands to heart center. And then interlace the fingers. So offsetting the fingers, interlacing, and giving yourself a nice little grip. And then we're going to extend the arms straight out in front of us and twist so that the right arm comes over the left. So you end up with the right wrist over the left. The left palm is roughly face up, right palm is roughly face down, and squeeze the shoulders back. Sweep the arms up and overhead and take yourself through forward fold. So you end up with kind of the back of the left wrist towards the mat, or maybe you roll all the way over so that the back of the right hand is towards the mat. And keep the weight in the feet anchored and centered so you get that good posterior pull in the lumbar. And then we'll come back to neutral. Keep the hands together and sweep yourself all the way up and overhead. So now a traditional arm alignment or a traditional rotational alignment. Arms up and overhead. Release the arms out in front of you. And the left arm is going to go over the right. So it's just a rotation of left, right over the right. Sweep up and overhead. And then come into fold. So if you can get that left back of the left hand down, that is beautiful. Or you can roll all the way over. So that I was wrong. Right hand down or left hand can roll all the way over. We're not mirroring. So whatever works appropriate for you, we want the back of one of the hands anchored. And whichever is available is the key. It doesn't really matter which one. It matters which one is right for you. And then we get that left side posterior engagement and elongation as we take that little wrist roll. And then we'll return back to neutral arm alignment and sweep the arms up and overhead. Okay, now we're gonna squeeze those arms behind us and really try to get the shoulders to broaden out. Really thinking about how we can take that shoulder structure and get some nice big open spaces. And then bend the elbows so that the hands can come to the back of the head. This is really one of my favorite shapes. It's a hard shape to know if you're teaching appropriately. But what I want to do is I want you to think about the hands as the cradle. And then you're going to push the back of the head into that cradle. And at the same time, you're going to push the cradle into the back of the head so that the head isn't actually moving, but there's a huge amount of energy that is being generated in that hand cradle that you've created. And now while we're creating that energy, we're going to sink back into chair. Remember, hips back, not knees forward. And then we'll rise back up. Keep that back of the head energy. And then you're going to keep that back of the head energy as you take your forward fold. So this is really hard. You don't want your chin to tuck, and you have to work that back of the neck musculature really hard. You'll also notice how the lumbar is really interlaced with this cervical spine musculature. At the bottom of the fold, release the hands. And as you release the hands, feel how the lumbar just unlocks. And there's this huge depth that you just sink into. That's what we're looking for. And then let's plant our hands and we'll walk back into down dog. And from down dog, we're going to come to hands and knees tabletop. And from hands and knees tabletop, we'll sweep the legs out in front of us. And as the legs extend out in front of us, we're just going to follow that forward into the fold. So you've just freed up all this lumbar space. Make sure that you're using that. And what I mean by that is if the restriction is in the hamstrings, we want to transcend that. Even if you're not feeling, so what we don't want to do is feel all of the shape in the hamstrings. But if you're not feeling this in the lumbar, if you're maybe feeling this all the way up under the scapula, all the way high into the thoracic spine, that's perfect. If you're feeling it in the lumbar, also perfect. But if it's gone past the lumbar, it just means we've opened up that lumbar tissue enough that we can start to work higher into the back. So make sure that we don't waste all that space we've created by letting the hamstrings get in the way. And then let's release and find our way onto our backs for this full appreciation of that work. Maybe letting the eyes close here, but really taking in the sensation of grounding as the backside of your body greets the mat. And so this archaeologist, he keeps getting this same thing, that there's this mirror, like this magical mirror in this mythical city, or maybe mythical city. And it keeps, the text keeps saying the same thing, like it can only grant one specific wish, but it doesn't say what that wish is. And it's so weird because anytime he's ever come across wish granting mythology, it's always been infinitely open. There's never been this closed parameters around what the wish is. So he becomes even more curious in this city. Last 20 seconds here. When you're right, we are going to allow our left. So inhale to bring your knees into a bed shape if they're not there. Then our left knee is gonna fall out wide. And then the right leg is gonna extend so that the medial edge of the right thigh is connected with the left foot. So you create this figure 4 shape. And then take your right arm out towards cactus. And the left arm is going to reach to the right hip. So trying to grab that ilium. If the left shoulder just doesn't have that space, you can go more towards the belly or belly button. But if you can get over to that right hip, left arm comes across the body, right arm is in cactus, left knee is in that figure 4 shape, right leg is extended. And we're just gonna settle here for a moment. So he gets off the plane, and the very first thing he does is he finds a local guide. And the local guide is going to be there to help him translate because he's not going to have his computer that can do all this translation work. All right, to unwind this, we're going to release the left hand first and then bring the left knee up so that it points towards the ceiling, and then bend the right knee so that it mirrors the left. And just try to resettle and rebalance. And then we'll take this to the second side. So right knee falls out wide, left leg extends, left arm goes to cactus, right arm reaches across so that the right hand can grab that left hip if it's available. If it's not, it can go more towards the belly. And so he connects with this guide. It's the very first guide. And he says, you know, I'm looking for this lost city. This city, it was known as Reflection. And the guide says, oh yeah, I know where Reflection is. It's not a problem. I can take you there. And the archaeologist, he starts laughing, like, yeah, sure, bud, whatever you say. But the guide looks back at him deadpan and he says, when do you want to go? And he realizes he's serious, but now he's concerned, like, is this a scam? Is this guy going to take me out in the jungle and help me? What's happening? But he can't pass up this opportunity. So he says, let's go now. They get in this little side-by-side car, totally Indiana Jones style. They drive out as far as the road will go, and then the road ends. And they have to machete their way through the jungle. And they come to this huge canyon. At the bottom of the canyon, there's very clearly an abandoned city. Right arm releases. Right knee comes back to pointing towards the ceiling. Left knee mirrors. And we'll start to sway those knees side to side. Nice little lateral rotation. And just moving fluidly here so that your spine can receive, but not just your spine, but that shape we were in there. It's kind of simple, right? It's like hand across the body, little figure 4. Those are all things that you wouldn't think of as challenging, but when we combine them all together, we put the anterior and posterior chains under a lot of strain. So as you're moving here, try to alleviate that strain that you've put on the body. And then the next time the knees fall over towards the left, let's allow them to stay there. Good little settling here. And so they make their way down this canyon, and the guide takes them up and shows him through the buildings. And this archaeologist, he looks at the guide and he says, "Is there a mirror?" And the guide kind of looks back at him wide eye. And he doesn't take a step. He doesn't say anything. The archaeologist says, "Take me to it." And with some level of reluctancy, the guide takes him up this little maze and up this tower. And then in the like cliff wall itself, there's this mirror. And it's almost like this mirror is naturally in this wall. It doesn't make any sense. It's the cliff wall. And the archaeologist steps in front of the mirror, and it doesn't show a reflection of him. But these ancient symbols kind of just appear. And he looks at the guide and he says, "What does it say?" And the guide says, "Oh, you don't need to know that. There's nothing good that comes of that." The archaeologist looks back in the mirror. He doesn't see his reflection. He sees these symbols, and they're clearly saying something. He looks at the guide and he says, "What does it say?" And the guide says, "The gift of sameness for anyone who wishes." And the archaeologist kind of looks back at the guide and he's like, "What does that mean?" And the guide doesn't say anything. When you're right, when you're ready, knees return back to neutral. And settle here, and then we'll eventually let the knees fall over to the second side, the right side. And so the guide's not saying anything. The archaeologist turns back to the mirror and he says the words, "I wish." And as he does it, this huge explosion of light just bursts from the mirror. And the archaeologist turns to the guide and he's expecting to get this lecture. But the guide looks back at him with this huge smile. It's a smile that seems super familiar. And they both look at each other and they say, "That's it," at the same time. And so after some more digging around, they head back to town. And when they get back to town, everywhere this archaeologist goes is like the most busy place he's ever been. And then when he looks in other directions, it's like there's no one there. It's like it's a ghost town wherever he's not. Wherever he is, everyone seems to be. Wherever he's not, no one seems to be. And over the course of the next few moments, he starts to realize everyone is thinking like he thinks. Everyone wants the same things he wants. Everyone is hungry when he's hungry. And he looks down at his pants and he has this huge tear in his pants. And he looks just right across the street and there's like this seamstress. And he goes into the seamstress and there's no one there. And there's a sign on the desk and it says, "I've become an archaeologist. I'll see you later." When you're right, when you're ready, knees return back to neutral. Let's let the bottoms of the feet come together and the knees fall out wide. One little last touch for this medial line. And soon enough, this archaeologist realizes that everyone likes everything he likes, goes to the same restaurants he likes to go to, eats at the same time he wants to eat. He has to wait in these massive lines everywhere he goes. But beyond that, he can't get on a plane to go back home because everyone has turned into archaeologists. When you're right, when you're ready, knees return to neutral. Let your eyes close, let your awareness drift within you. Ask yourself if there is anything you might want, need, desire before Shavasana. And if there is, offer that to yourself. And if there's not, if you're ready for Shavasana, just get yourself into a space where you can feel comfortable and relaxed and at ease. And find your way into a shape where you can appreciate some stillness. So at first, everything seemed so cohesive because when everyone around him was thinking the way he thought, there was never any disagreement. But the more this goes on, the more frustrated the more frustrating it is when he can't get his pants repaired, when he can't get on a plane, when he can't get the services he wants. When the restaurants can only cook the food he knows how to cook. Just drifting into a state of stillness when you're ready. So the more frustrated this archaeologist becomes, the more focus and time and energy he puts on and into figuring out a way to undo his wish. And he starts going through the ancient texts again. And he thinks he finds this thing where if he smashes the mirror, everything will go back to normal. So he goes and gets that guide. And this guide is a completely different person now, but he takes him out into this jungle once again. They follow the path they went the first time. They get down into this abandoned ancient city. He picks up this rock and he smashes it into the mirror. And the mirror doesn't budge at all, but this huge explosion of light bursts out from the mirror. And as it does, he turns to the guide and the guide starts screaming at him. And he knows he's undone what he needed to undo. Start to bring some movement to your fingers and your toes. Into your wrists and your ankles, up through your elbows and your knees, shoulders and hips, neck and head. Eventually, we'll bring enough movement through our body that we can transition from the shapes we are in back into a seat. And in this seated space, we'll let our spine get tall, breath get fluid, eyes closed. With your next inhale, let's bring our hands together, heart center. Over the course of the next 7 days, when you inevitably run into the world, into people in the world who are different than you, can you appreciate that diversity? Recognizing that if everyone were just like you, your life would be a lot harder than you can imagine. And see how that changes your experience. Thank you so much for being a part of tonight's practice and for being you. Namaste. Happy Monday, guys. Appreciate the heck out of you being here. Love the heck out of you. I will be back next Sunday to do some recharging, and we'll move again next Monday. Love you. Have a beautiful week. See you soon. Mwah.